Hi there, it's November 24th and we're continuing our progress through the first letter of Peter. We're starting in chapter 2 verse 11 going through to chapter 3 and verse 7. In the initial part of our reading, Peter is encouraging people to live as those who are followers of Jesus, not to be pulled back by the desires of the world, but to let their lives show as examples of who Jesus is, even if that means at cost to themselves, even if that means suffering for them. First of all, he encourages everyone to be subjects to the authorities, to be subject to Caesar and to governors, just as Jesus was himself. Obviously, Jesus' obedience cost him his life. He didn't fight against the authorities, even though they were treating him unjustly. And therefore, Peter is encouraging his readers to be like Jesus. And then in another category of people that he's speaking to, he speaks to slaves, those who are in the category that we don't know today, or we don't have as part of our society, but slavery was common in those times. But Peter says again, as examples of Jesus, as those who are going to demonstrate Jesus, submit to those who are in authority over you. Don't fight against them. Be submissive to them, work with them. And actually he quotes from Jesus, he quotes from maybe a hymn that was of the time, saying that Jesus suffered on our behalf, that he left an example for us. He didn't sin, there wasn't any evil found in his mouth. He gave himself to bear our sins, referring back to Isaiah, perhaps, to Isaiah 53. So just as Jesus has submitted himself to the authorities and has suffered this way, so Peter encourages those who suffer to do so, even when they're suffering, it seems, unjustly. Also, he then speaks to women, and he says, women, don't let your beauty be just about the outward. Don't let your beauty be about dressing up and looking great and making up. He says, but let your beauty be the inner beauty. And he also says that in this way you may win your husbands. This is suggesting that there were many women who were coming to know Jesus, and their husbands were not yet believers. Of course, Christian faith for women in these times was an important liberator, because women were finding a place, they were given a place which they wouldn't have had in Roman Greek society. They were regarded as equal alongside men in the church, and for this reason there will be many women who were coming to know Jesus. But they are to live lives which are loving for their husbands, or submitting to their husbands, so that they might win their husbands as well. And in the same way, Peter also encourages the husbands, the men, to live in peace and love with their wives, because they are heirs of the grace of life, just as the men are. This is an interesting thing that Peter is saying. They're not lesser. They may seem weaker in bodily terms, but actually they are not lesser in terms of their inheritance with Jesus, and therefore men need to be loving their wives and caring for them, just as wives need to be loving and caring for their husbands. There's a lot of things here that may cause us questions as 21st century citizens, but actually from Peter's day there's a lot of freedom going on here. In fact, at one point he says, live as free, but also live as slaves of Jesus. Our first call is to be his. Our first call is to live as his people, and everything else falls into place. Let us seek in our day and age to be examples, to be letters to be read of all men, of how Jesus' life is. Let us not be afraid of suffering, and let us not contradict, let us not rebel, but let us be in loving submission to all those, so that we can example Jesus' own life. Have a very good November 24th.